Yo, what's happening, all you badass mofos out there in the Black Army radio realm? Welcome back. Or if you're new here, welcome to the movement. We're glad you locked in today. Now, before we get into all this stuff, if this show's ever made you laugh, think, feel some kind of way, positive way, hopefully, hit that 5-star rating. It actually means a lot to us. We really appreciate it. And that episode that was in any kind of way informative that you wanted to send your buddy, go ahead and send that sucker. All right. Now that we got the bills paid on this sucker, how we doing today, Joel? What's happening, man?
Doing good. Another hot day, 90 degrees. Headed up to the mountains tomorrow, so I'm excited to get the fuck out of the city. I actually might be able to see you in person and not through a screen, which would be crazy.
Yeah, you're gonna be in Yampa, right?
Yeah, I always miss Yampa. There's not a time I don't miss Yampa. It's slower pace,
It's got its
simple,
own unique little
you know.
charm, especially in the 4th of July.
Oh yeah,
The 4th of July
it's a
in
good
this
time.
town is the coolest 4th of July. Out of all the 4th of Julys that I've 4th of July'd is in Yampa, Colorado. And I'm not kidding, folks. It is crazy. It's intense. Like, cops don't even come into town. It's like the town, everybody that lives here competes with the city for the fireworks show. They start buying like July 5th for the next year, like all their stuff that they're going to use for the next July 4th. It's really cool.
It's lame because it's way cooler. Like when I was little, the cops were assholes, dude, and they were busting everybody left and right. If you were riding a four-wheeler, if you were lighting off fireworks, dude, they were giving tickets. They were taking keys away from four-wheelers, and now everyone's hauling around on the four-wheelers or the ATVs and dirt bikes. And I was like, man, wish I was like 15 again and stealing beers from coolers. Those good old days.
Dude, I remember being a cop here and hearing like the SO and everybody talk about how they were going to handle Yampa on the 4th of July. And they basically just came to the conclusion that they're just going to sit on the outskirts and wait for gunshots, if they can even differentiate gunshots from the fireworks. Just kind of let it go. So, yeah, pretty cool.
I had friends who lived over by you and then who lived over by me on the other side of town. And they would be on the radio, like talking to each other when the cops were coming over. So one side of town would be lighting off fireworks, and then the cops would come, and then they'd all go to that side of town, and then the other side of town would be lighting off fireworks. I mean, yeah, man, it was a good time.
Silly kids. Silly kids. If you haven't noticed, if you're watching the show, we do have what appears to be a third guest. And so, without any further ado, from an undisclosed location where the old wounds of warriors are laid open and stitched back together by hands that have studied the architecture of the broken mind. Tonight we welcome the healer of the unhealable, the researcher who looked at the broken places and warriors and first responders and trauma victims and said, there is a medicine for this, and I will go find it. Dr. Melina Bricker. Hello.
Oh, that's quite an introduction.
Yes, well, I shortened it up quite a bit, actually. And so, before we get started into this, I'm going to give a quick little background on you. And this was actually going to be a 2-part deal, but I think we're going to focus on a particular subject and rather than a couple subjects. And that will become more clear as the more I talk. So, Dr. Melina Bricker is a research PhD psychologist, writer, and public servant in local government. She has served as a deputy county manager as well as county director of human services. Front and center of changes wrought from federal cuts to essential human service programs and brings insights to the practical and local impacts such significant budgetary changes cause for individuals and families at the local level. Now, that was what we were going to talk about. However, most interestingly, and where we're actually going to start with, you did your PhD psychology dissertation on psychedelic therapy for veterans, trauma survivors, and first responders, which was published into a book called The Reset: Trauma, Treatment, Resilient Disease, and How Psychedelics Could Save America. Here it is, right here. Bing, 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 bing. The brain on the front is super cool. So, with that being said, let's begin, shall we? Not with a question, though. Okay, First, let's just go over a few numbers really quick, because this entire interview, theoretically, is going to be about psychedelic therapy. Okay, psychedelic healing, psychedelic treatment, the stigma involved with it, where we're at today, where we used to be, where we need to go, outcomes, speculation, research, all the different kinds of stuff. And so, what are some of the numbers? 71% of veterans and first responders with PTSD experience lasting symptom relief at 12 months after MDMA assisted therapy. 67% no longer meet PTSD diagnostic criteria after 3 sessions. In other words, after 3 sessions, it's eliminated. That's how it sounds to me. The veteran suicide rate is more than twice the non-veteran adult suicide rate, with more than 6,000 veteran suicides per year over the last few decades. Now, President Trump signed an executive order on April 18th, 2026, fast-tracking psychedelic therapy, particularly for veterans. All right, the federal landscape seemingly is beginning to change, thanks in large part to podcaster Joe Rogan, I must say, who I have listened to extensively on this subject many, many, many times, screaming in the car, "Fuck yes, exactly." So, now for the questions for the lovely young doctor. Here we go. Your PhD dissertation was on psychedelic therapy for veterans, trauma survivors, and first responders. That's a pretty awesome research focus, I must say. It took a lot of intellectual courage to choose a topic such as that. So please tell me, how'd you end up there and what pulled you towards that question specifically?
I think it followed a really odd trajectory. It started with working directly with people with behavioral health crises, right? So in subacute settings, people are either entering or exiting an inpatient hospitalized setting, whether it's for substance abuse or mental health issues. Usually it's both. What happened is naturally gravitated toward the programming side of things, right? Looking at why people are constantly in these systems that seem to not be doing anything. We're not seeing any recovery. We're still seeing increased rates of chronic disease and disorder. Something's broken. So the first line of thought was, well, fix the system. So went in to pursue education in human services and rehabilitation. Very quickly found that even if you fix a system, if you have people operating in the system that are not um, invested in the sustainability of it, if you have people that are undertrained in systems theory and don't really understand the influence of the system on individual lives, then you don't make a difference. So that led to education. So went and pursued education and opportunities in teaching others how to help effectively, especially within systems that seem to be immovable. Um, and then that segued into just observation of what impacts people's ability to learn, change, and grow, what impacts motivation. And it ended up being a weird kind of aha moment where it was just this very, very direct and specific correlation between um, traumatic experiences and a life of chronic disease and dishealth. And so looking at chronic disease as something that is treatment resistant, right? So you can think of an aggressive cancer, or you can think of even alcoholism or opioid addiction. These can be really, really long lasting chronic diseases and disorders. And the success rate for people, regardless of their will, of their circumstance, of their mindset, even support, regardless of support, sometimes it just doesn't work. Nothing seems to work. And so if we are going to take a deductive lens, then we start peeling away the layers until we find the root. And you'd mentioned earlier some of the data around veterans not experiencing symptoms, so symptom relief. And unfortunately, that's a very kind of Western medicine idea of, well, let's manage the symptoms. And so when looking at chronic dishealth, it's not symptoms that are the issue, though they're the most obvious. It's the internal cause that is creating these cycles that seem unbreakable. when looking at just early research with psychedelic assisted therapy, it was shocking to me that this wasn't more well known, that this wasn't, supported in a bipartisan fashion. It was just shocking to me because psychedelics are what address the root cause, and that's the neurobiological impacts of trauma. So, long answer to a really good question, but it started with just trying to understand how people can help themselves, especially when they have lost all of the tools to do so.
Well, thank you for your response. How long-winded that was. It was excellent. Okay, so walk me through your dissertation, what it actually found in non-doctor language.
Okay. Yes. So there's a lot of research into like the really hard science perspective on the impact of psychedelic substances on just brains in general, right? And so you can have the very scientific, inaccessible, not really useful, not really digestible information, or you can see, the other side of things where people are talking about, oh, the inherent dangers or misinformation about it. And what was really missing was, well, what happens? Like, if you have a life that no longer seems worth living, and you often, as a last resort, engage in this very, very difficult transformational process with these plant medicines, what happens to you as a person? Like, what happens to your life, your relationships, your self regulation, your goals, your ambitions, your hopes? And it's been largely missing from a lot of the scientific research because it falls into either hard science or, social science camps. But the result of not bringing that all together and communicating it in a digestible way is that people really don't understand the real impacts that this kind of treatment can have on people who, across the board, at least in my research, engaged in this therapy as an absolute last resort.
Interesting. Excellent. Excellent response. Okay. Question. Okay, so when you were doing this research, I want to know how, when you first started thinking about this, when you're like, hey, this interests me, I'm going to do it. I'm going to spend a lot of time on it. I'm really interested in these outcomes. Where was the field then versus kind of where it was when you finished your dissertation, right? And then defended. Obviously, you had to defend it before you received, your final degree. And then, do you believe that the university treated you as a serious researcher based on the fact that you were focusing on psychedelics?
Yeah, great questions. So completed this. I completed my doctoral research and study in 4 years. So from the time I became very interested in it, which was right around the beginning mark of my studies, to early 2025, when I wrapped everything up, there were some significant changes. Namely, for example, state of Colorado did the Healing Center legislation, which offered more inroads for the use of psilocybin in healing center settings and with licensed and unlicensed facilitators, which is a really great thing. It's a step in the right direction. But really, the field has been struggling up to about 8 to 10 years ago, just because of the restrictions on your ability to research. If you look at my study, one of the inclusionary criteria was that all of the participants had to have um, histories of trauma, which automatically puts them into a vulnerable category, right? So, with human subjects with any kind of unknown or Schedule 1 substances, it's really hard to do any meaningful research because just the research mechanisms and structures aren't suited to the actual treatment type and outcomes. I will say that the university I was studying with, I was quite hesitant to offer this as a suggested, research that would potentially be, it's attached to the university. The university had some very specific morals and ethos and faith-based elements to it in some areas. And so I was quite hesitant to submit that. And very, very fortunately, the increased awareness, I think, just societally of widespread trauma, whether it's childhood trauma, situational trauma, a lot of first responder and veteran trauma. I think that was probably the deciding factor for not just my university, but also just society and the government as a whole to go, well, if we agree trauma is an issue and there is something that's, innovative, effective, maybe it's worth exploring. And so, from a trauma lens, it was a lot more acceptable in the university. My chair, my committee didn't give me any pushback. They said, "This sounds interesting. We've not seen anything like it. So go for it." And they very much treated me as a legitimate researcher, as did the very welcoming treatment facility that I was able to do my study at.
That's refreshing, I gotta say, because man, I feel like the universities have always kind of been a little bit, you know what I mean? They're obviously a little bit more open to this kind of stuff than at least probably the general public a little bit too, but I mean, via the federal government, kind of couldn't be. So it was one of those things. It's like, do you want to be in a cage for 20 years? No. But the universities, I'm glad to see that they're still on board with this, especially a university has a faith-based component to it. That's good. So let's look at the numbers a little bit, what the research actually shows. All right. The headline number that keeps showing up in the research literature is the MDMA assisted psycho. Actually, you know what? Could you give a really good, because I heard this is the second time I brought up MDMA. I could describe it. Could you describe what it is? Just to give us a quick overview for when I say what that is, so people have a reference point to it.
Yes. Do you want me to talk specifically about MDMA, like from a psychedelic treatment standpoint?
More just like I guess, I mean, really, I guess just more of like a definition on what MDMA stands for. So when I say what it is, and I say MDMA rather than saying the whole thing, it's just like, hey, this is what MDMA means, and this is kind of what it is.
Okay, so MDMA, it's and I am not great at pronouncing things off the cuff, but I'm going to do my best. But 3,4 methylenedioxymethamphetamine, right? So you're going to call it ecstasy, Molly. It's a synthetic drug, so it's also a
LSD.
mild hallucinogen. So well, LSD is naturally occurring. The synthetic version was derived from the growth on wheat plants. You might you probably remember that from there was Salem witch trials where they thought it was
Oh yeah,
ergot.
argon. What do they call it?
Yeah.
Argon
Mm-hmm.
or something?
Ergot. Yeah. So
Ergot.
it is.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's a synthetic,
yeah.
so it mimics the same, chemical composition and impact on the brain. MDMA is different in that it's got that methamphetamine component to it, so it does produce those feelings of, increased energy, pleasure, emotional connection. It's often labeled an empathogen, so whether accurately or inaccurately, and so it helps to develop a sense of connection and trust. It reduces inhibitions. It's ecstasy. It's a good term for it.
Didn't
So yeah, so different from LSD in that it has that stimulant component, but similar in that there are hallucinogenic properties for sure.
didn't they use ecstasy in like marriage counseling in like the 80s and 90s? Like microdosing
Oh
ecstasy
my
for
god,
marriage
that's a
counseling and
great
stuff.
idea. Holy shit.
Hmm.
That is like
Yeah,
the best I
yeah,
could you
Joel. I'm so glad you
imagine?
brought that up.
Let's go to marriage counseling.
Hmm.
I mean, are you kidding me? That's the best thing you could have done for those people. I mean, like, if you
Yeah.
really think about it. I mean, you're gonna re-engage that person physically on a
Well,
level
and I
you may have never experienced before. You know what I mean?
that's when it was still like a pill and it was a medicine, so people were willing to take it. I think the big thing with like one ecstasy for take large amounts, like isn't it depleting your serotonin at like a massive
Well, I'm
level if
sure
you
it's
take
yeah, I'm sure it's bad
large
on
amounts?
large amounts. Yeah. But if
But
you do it like
with like the view on it from like the conservative side, like at one point it was a drug that they're using in a setting and then it became this club drug, and same with like mushrooms, like it's like people think when like I talk to people about microdosing all the time and I'm like, no, you take like 100 milligrams, maybe 200 milligrams, depending on where you're at. And like, you're not tripping balls. You don't feel anything. And if you're doing it like coupled with therapy or meditation, like and people still think like you're eating mushrooms and you're going to see little green men running around and want to start picking
you're talking
cherries
about
when you hear
microdosing,
music and
right?
stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
Microdosing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Microdosing.
Yeah, there's
And
been a lot of
that's
people
a
who've had a lot of
really
positive experiences with that. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was gonna say it's a I love that you brought that up because yes, there's actually a resurgence now in marriage and family counseling with a lot of providers being interested in having this as an add-on complementary therapy. And it's not I mean, I think I'm pretty sure that your audience is not children.
No,
So,
no, we're good.
I mean, it's very easy to associate, oh, well, they just want to take ecstasy and have mind blowing sex. That's not actual therapy. But the function of it is very different. So, as a mechanism for connection, it's an opening of not just a neurological pathway, but a broader sense of perceiving the person and the world and the relationships that you hold. I mean, ketamine is also used on occasion. A lot of psychedelics can perform that function of opening up different ways of thinking and relating to the world and the people we have around us in ways that we couldn't imagine before because we were burdened by our emotional response to that stimuli. So, using something like MDMA in couples therapy is not giving people drugs so that they have a great date night. It is using it as a facilitator to really being able to reflect upon and apply the different strategies that you've learned in that session. And I think that's really important to highlight because that goes across all psychedelic treatments. That's a really good point, Joel.
Yeah, that's I mean, a little bit of excellent physical contact is definitely not gonna hurt.
Yeah.
You're gonna get that as well, you know what I mean? And I think that especially if that's something you're lacking in your marriage, like, that's an obvious component that I mean, that is gonna immediately rectify that situation, at least at that moment, at least at that time, you know, I mean, yeah, interesting. That is an excellent question, Joel. God damn it. That was good
Well,
st that was really good.
I got like I went to college and I did 3 years, 2.5 years ish in psychology before I changed my major. So like I have a small like background of psychology and like the psychedelics and what drugs do. I've been really like just fascinated. I saw it from like the other end of like what drugs should I not do to make me depressed, more or less is like how I
Right.
saw it because I like to party and I did do ecstasy a couple times and like the day after was like the most sad day ever. I was like, I do not like this like dump
Yeah.
of serotonin, like and then it also made me like if I'm gonna take something like that, like what is it gonna do? Like what's the long term? What's the short term? When is it safe? When is it not? So I kind of I know a little bit about it, and I mean I microdose mushrooms probably 3 times a week. So I mean
Man, yeah, I've done that myself, and it's very subtle. It seems like non-noticeable, you know, but it definitely puts you in it seems like just a little bit of a better mental state for the day. So, that being
and
said, next question.
go back
Next
to
question.
Mel.
All right. All right. MDMA-assisted psychotherapy produces lasting PTSD symptom relief. 71% of veterans and first responders at 12 months, right? So for comparison, what's the equivalent number if you were to use a different strategy or um, a
So,
different
what's the
device,
comparison
mechanism,
between the
the
MDMA assisted
delivery?
versus
Exactly, like
traditional
a
forms of
pill,
therapy? Hmm.
like a pill versus like, are the outcomes with the pills in any way, you know, antidepressants, therapy, church, you know, obviously you have all the meetings, NA, AA, like, you know, people go to PTSD meetings, all kinds of stuff. Is there any research on how those statistics look?
Yeah, yeah, and as with all research that talks about the human condition, there are a lot of inputs to it, right? So when you're looking at traditional modes of therapy, it depends upon the symptom severity for the individual and what they're willing to do and seek. But when you look at traditional forms of therapy, that usually includes things, you know, like cognitive behavioral therapy. You've got EMDR, you've got, of course, pharmaceutical. psychotropic assisted therapies, which is just a prescription that you get, and that's largely symptom masking for the most part. Um, and so you can combine all of those. You can have an individual that is struggling with, you name it, whether it's, treatment resistant depression or complex PTSD, an eating disorder. That's a really, really common thing, particularly for women that have childhood trauma, is severe eating disorders. And you can look at all of that and say, okay, this individual exercises daily, eats well, is making sure they're taking care of their body. They have good supports. They have a good, faith or community around them, and they're still not doing good. And that's usually that category where we say that's chronic, that's treatment resistant. And so pursuing things that mask those symptoms so that people can just kind of get by, that's kind of the efficacy mark for a lot of those traditional therapies, right? Is just symptom relief. And that ranges anywhere from nothing to a maximum of maybe 30%.
You're
And
talking
then
about a
when you,
masking. You're talking about a masking, like a cloaking device almost. It's
Well,
yes,
not
and most of those drugs create some sort of dependency, so like if you decide you want to come off them, like you have to like drip feed off them, like it's not um
some of them are really
yeah,
dangerous to get off of, from
yeah,
my
yeah,
understanding.
yes,
Yeah.
super
yes.
dangerous.
And we may talk about classification later, but just one example, I worked for a number of years in subacute crisis center, right? So this was before a lot of regulations. And so I, at the time, it was legal and it was acceptable, but I was the medication administrator, right? So I would have the med keys. Everything has to be locked down because it was a facility that had people with substance use disorder and they were detoxing. And then we also had people with really, really heavy, attractive medications. And so I just got in this routine of constantly seeing, okay, what's the diagnosis? What's the prescription? What's the substance use? What's the prescription? And across the board, the the kinds of medicines that were um, just considered less dangerous were the ones that we were excluded from accepting people for because they were so physically dangerous. So alcohol. Alcohol is one of the substances that is completely legal, very common, heavily consumed, and that can kill you to detox from. You can 100% have significant seizures, particularly if you're long-term late-stage chronic alcoholic. And then the other one was
And
benzodiazepines.
also, really quick too on that, on alcohol, which is our our intoxicant of legal choice in the United States. It kills, I wanna
Not
say, and this is off
actually
the top of
more
my head.
people real quick, more people smoke weed than drink alcohol for the first time in American history.
Mhm.
Well,
As of
that's
2025.
fantastic.
Yep, yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's fantastic
Yep.
based on the numbers I'm about ready to say, right? I think, and it's off the top of my head, but I've looked at this a few times. Like like nationally, I want to say the number's around 230 something thousand killed a year, alcohol related deaths in the United States, like total, something like that per year. Globally, it's obvious. I think it's well over a million. Check me on that, Joel. Check me. I'm pretty sure.
I'm checking.
But it's like, I mean, it wrecks family. When I was a cop, when you show up to a domestic violence case, it is substantially different if homeboys had to handle a wild turkey. Substantially different if homeboys had to handle a wild turkey versus smoked a little bit of weed. I mean, honestly, I probably wouldn't even be there if you just smoked a little bit of weed. You know what I'm saying? Completely different outcomes, man. And cops are real susceptible to this stuff because cops don't have any other way to medicate. And same thing with soldiers, even have any kind of way to medicate besides alcohol. That's it when you go home. And and a lot of the times it turns into an angry situation. And it's like the state is not serving them at all by basically telling them that basically the only thing they can go out and purchase on their own to deal with whatever it is they're dealing with is alcohol, which is basically the worst substance you could possibly decide to use. What do you got there for numbers, Joel?
So 178,000 annually, and the last time they measured or did this was 2000 and 2001, and about 2.6 million people globally.
Okay, so that was pretty close. I was
Yeah,
a little bit
you're in the
more
ballpark.
nationally and way less globally, but yeah, all in all, you're talking around, 2.5 million people dead a year globally from alcohol. It's like psychedelics. How many people do they kill every year? As long as you're not doing something else crazy with it, right? You're just doing that by itself. Zero, zero. Marijuana, zero, zero per year. Okay. Okay. Anyway, you got anything else you want to say about that question, or you want to move on to the next one?
One thing. So when we look at the impact of alcohol used as a self-medicating substance, or that's most of the time, right? I'm tired. I want to unwind. I want to have a glass of wine. I want to have this. I want to go out with friends. I want to have a margarita. So it's used socially a lot, and it's widely accepted. Increasingly more with things like marijuana THC use, because it's just, I think over time people start seeing the comparatives between impact. But when we talk about the negative impact of alcoholism or illicit substances that really truly do deserve the Schedule One designation, even if they're not, um, it's not just the deaths that are related to it; it's the destruction on the family unit as a result of it. And so, when we can say this is one person's death, it's also the loss of a parent, it's the loss of a relationship, it's the loss of time through incarceration and poor decision making, it's the loss of employment and financial solvency because you have an addiction you can't kick that is everywhere all the time, widely accepted. And so when we approach the substance use disorders and compulsive disorders, and we designate one as acceptable, yet it's harmful, and then designate others that are helpful as harmful, we've not only sold the poison, forced its consumption, but then we've withheld the remedy. And so I think that it's more than just who has died. It's what has the path of destruction been, and how have we allowed that as a society?
Even worse than withholding the remedy is they offer fake remedies.
Yeah, or they'll sell it to you.
Exactly. And so it's worse than actually it's even more sinister than that. It's even more
Yes.
sinister than that. And so let's go on to the next question, which is actually really interesting. I'm really curious how you're gonna. So, based on the recovery rates and everything, what's actually happening, or can you describe what's actually happening neurologically? How they're responding to this neurologically, obviously in their brains.
Yes, I love that question. So this was the whole premise of my research, right? Was because you have to back engineer the problem, and so when you look at the impact that trauma has, so trauma is used a lot. It's used as commonly as like resilience and cultural competence, and so these throwaway terms that lose their meaning need to be redefined. And so when we're talking about trauma, we're talking about either acute, which is like really, really severe in the moment kinds of trauma events, or we're talking about chronic trauma, which is significant toxic levels of stress over time. You see that more with like childhood and developmental trauma. And then you also have complex trauma, which is a combination. So think about the impact of being in war. Think about the impact of living in abject poverty. You can think about all these different things. And so they all are trauma magnifiers when you get into those complex typologies. But when we look at the impact of trauma, whether it was acute, chronic, sustained, whatever it is, the actual neurobiological impact is neuronal atrophy. So your brain has pathways that are being formed from, before you are born and well after. And you have two really distinct periods of plasticity that's really, really important to know. There's two. We're often taught that it's just very early childhood, like infancy, early childhood, where you have explosive neural development, but you actually get a second period of critical plasticity when you are in adolescence because you are becoming a completely different human being as you mature. So these two times of critical plasticity are times when the brain is more likely to be seeking new and innovative and identity forming connections as you navigate your way through the world. When you have trauma events, particularly in early childhood, but they can happen at any time, your brain is going to revert into its survival mode. And I'm going to do my best to like communicate this in layman's terms. If I am not, just stop me and tell me to communicate it in layman's terms.
You see my
Um,
eyes go crossed.
okay. So, when I like to use the analogy of ruts, and so everybody's driven on some backcountry road somewhere, and you know that you have got to be so careful when those ruts are established, right? Because they will snag your tires and they will take you where they are already destined to go. So, when you're developing, you start developing those same pathways, those same ruts. They are reinforced pathways through stimuli and response. So, when we have a reaction that is a survival response to a bear, and the bear is eliciting something that is a very adaptive response in a human. All of the sudden, I'm either, you've heard fight, flight, freeze. There's also fawn has been added, which does make a lot of sense. Um, but you have a very, very visceral reaction to that stress event. Once the stress event resolves, your brain goes back to its normative function. What happens though when you live with the bear? And the bear comes home every night, and the bear hits you, and the bear hurts you and takes advantage of you. Your brain starts to develop those survival pathways that then become those dried out ruts that will catch your tires whenever there's a turn in your life, a stress event, whether it's a regular argument with a friend, whether it is your kid mouthing off to you. You're going to have a stress event trigger, and instead of your tires going on the path that says I can manage this and respond to this appropriately and thoughtfully, your tires get snagged in those preformed dried out ruts, and they take you on a path that you don't want to go, and you don't know why you're going there, but all of a sudden you're drinking again as you drive, and you screamed at your spouse, and you're not sure you're going to stay married anymore. And it's that kind of stuff that people find so difficult to overcome, because it is not because of a lack of will. It is not because of a lack of desire to be better for oneself and those around us. It is because the fundamental structure for managing normative stress events in your life has been hijacked and placed you in a battle responsive position. And you are never going to respond in a normative or healthy fashion if you don't have the groundwork or the template to do so.
Hmm.
Well, and I think
Wow.
too, it's like a double-edged sword because a lot of the people who are dealing with that are self-medicating, and then they're only depleting those pathways even more, And then it's like not only are you trying to come back from the depression and the root cause of it, but then you have to battle the addiction as well.
Yes. Yes. And that's a really good point. So I wanted to say this. You had mentioned just the impact of the like serotonin and dopamine after consuming something that enhances the production of that, right? So that imbalance is it's in a funny little part in your brain, your nucleus accumbens, right? It's your seesaw that's inside your brain that helps maintain homeostasis, right? So we have a balance between desire and inhibition. But when all of our systems of stress and reward are hijacked, whether it's through trauma or overuse of different substances, or it's due to just life circumstances. When we have imbalance there, when we can't have that homeostasis, it means that we're always too low, so we seek something much higher, and then we get quite high and we fall so low because we were so high. And so your teeter totter keeps going like this. And this is the seat. It is the actual neurobiological seat of compulsive disorders, of like eating disorders, of PTSD, where rumination is constant. It is when you get in a loop. And any women listening right now, this is the third week of your cycle when you can't stop thinking about something, because every chemical and hormone in your body is ruminating on all of the things that you cannot resolve. And so you're constantly in flux and you cannot find balance. So if you don't have the ability to rebalance yourself, which many people don't, then it just becomes this kind of snowball effect where you're constantly chasing the other elevation of the teeter-totter.
Yeah. You know, that's a great yeah, that's a good description. Also, I wanted to give like regarding your roots, going back on your roots constantly kind of thing. And I know a lot of my questions don't center around like stories specifics. I mean, I probably should have added some of those, but is there I remember you like reading about a story you had once. And that leave out names, everything else that your book leaves out all that stuff anyway, but it would that kind of fall along the lines of that gal that was able to talk to herself as a kid? You know what I mean? And kinda, like, almost feel like she destroyed those roots, you know what I mean, and made it flat again. Could you I feel like that'd be a great idea to give kind of an example of how psychedelics can help you without all of this doctor stuff and everything, like, just from the person's like, this is what this person experienced and how this changed their life, you know?
Yes, yes, absolutely. This wonderful woman was a first participant in my study, and I mean, she was lovely. Like if you met her in the street, you would go, "Wow, what a pretty, dialed in, successful young woman." Um, she started sharing her story, and she had had a childhood that initially she was like, "Yeah, it was a little stressful with my mom," and then really, really digging into it because she was struggling so much in her life. She was having trouble finishing school where previously she'd been a very high performer. She was engaging in really risky relationships and not really knowing why. Struggling with really severe alcoholism, really, really severe bulimia that had been present since she was about 11, and just very disordered eating, sleeping, and a lot of emotional lability, or a lot of emotional back and forth and up and down without any reason or cause. It was impacting her relationships, her health. She'd attempted suicide more than three, less than 10. And
Ugh.
she had really, really been struggling, and she had tried everything. She had tried individual counseling. She had tried cognitive behavioral therapy. She had tried talk therapy. She had tried going on adventures. She had tried developing her friend group more, trying to find something that really motivated her. Nothing was working. Nothing was working. And she was giving up. This was her very, very last attempt because she had had years and years and years of horrific health, really terrible terminal diagnoses scares. Again, still struggling with alcoholism, still struggling with bulimia. Um, and somebody had said to her, "Hey, have you ever tried or thought about psychedelic assisted therapy?" And she's like, "That sounds wacky, but I'm desperate because I think I'm not going to be alive next year." And she engaged with the clinic that was kind enough to let me do my study there, went through intensive pre-work, which doesn't include any kind of substances, anything like that. She gradually titrated or reduced the dosages of a lot of her psychotropic medications, which you can imagine there was a lot because they were trying to address symptoms that always changed. And she was able to abstain from alcohol for a short enough period of time that she was able to engage in the treatment. She did 3 sessions of psychedelic assisted treatment. And for many people who do this, it depends upon the substance, it
Can you
depends upon
say
the setting.
can you say which psychedelic it was that she used?
Yes. So she engaged in ketamine assisted therapy. And ketamine assisted therapy can be very, very effective. She did tell me that the most effective, though, was a transition to a full psilocybin journey. And that was more effective because ketamine is still a dissociative. So when you need to access really, really intense feelings, it can feel like I need to sneeze, but I can't. And so the psilocybin opened more doors for her. And so her really, really meaningful experience um, was reflecting on the relationship she had with her mom and realizing that her mom was incredibly psychologically and emotionally abusive. She wanted a doll. She didn't want a child. And so you must look right, you must speak right, you must never be happy unless I make you happy. And so what happened is she had no ability to control her decisions in life. So what does that look like is if you don't have any control, you start controlling what you can, like eating and vomiting and drinking. And so that kind of compulsive disorder that she had developed over time as a response to having no autonomy and no self efficacy and no identity as a person led her to all of these other cumulative impacts of really abusive relationships, really, um, just overconsumption of a lot of things in a self medicating way. When she went through um, her journey, when she and this was she had probably a total less than five, and I would say over half were ketamine, and then she had transitioned to the more full psilocybin therapy. Um, when I asked her what that was like, she said, "Well, I walked into a room, which is really common. People walk into rooms, they open doors. You're supposed to open doors, right? It's your mind telling you you should look at this, but you have to walk in yourself." So, as she was in her journey, which usually for people unfamiliar in a supported therapeutic setting, it typically looks like very dim lighting. It's usually your clinician's office. It's very intentionally set so that it's very peaceful. Everything is expected. You have a trusting relationship with your facilitator or your clinician. You've gone over rules of engagement, like if you're struggling and I can see you're struggling, is it okay for me to touch your foot? Is that okay? And so you go over all of this first, and during her journey, which is usually, you have some music playing, you have some guidance from your facilitator, and then you have like a sleep mask on. And she found herself in her mind walking through this house, and she kept opening doors. And she finally was like, I think I need to open this door. She opens the door and she sees a little girl, probably 9, 10, playing on the floor. And I will present a caveat. I cry a little when I tell this story, no matter how many times I tell it. So I'm going to do my very best to hide it. Um,
Hey, this is a
she
crying podcast,
approaches,
baby. That's
right?
what this is.
Yeah.
This is what we're
Let it
here to
rip.
share. Yeah.
I have no guns behind me. I have flowers and books. I'll be
It's
the
okay. I only
crier.
have books and pictures. Joel's Joel's
I'm really
Joel's
a I'm
Joel's
really
got
a
the
big
weaponry.
softy. All the tattoos and guns are just for show. I'm really a pussy.
I
Okay,
don't
well,
think so.
okay, so she approaches this little girl and then realizes as the girl turns to her that it's her. But it's not like she's not experiencing herself in a memory. She's meeting herself in a memory. And um
Hold
she
on. So
said that she
she's
just
just to clarify
Mhm.
this. So she's in her experience and she meets herself as a little girl and is able to have, I guess, some kind of meaningful exchange, dialogue experience with herself as a
Yes.
little girl. Wow.
Yes.
Jeez.
She said she had an overwhelming feeling that she needed to just crouch down and put her arms around her and say, "You're enough as you are. You're enough. And I love you." And she exited that experience. And what was really, really incredible was that it was almost, she described it as traveling through time and actually going to where she lived as a little girl, finding herself and giving her that comfort and what should have come from her mom or her dad, like that should have come from the people tasked with caring for and nurturing her, and it didn't. And that was what was broken. And she was able to go and give herself that information almost back in time so that when she exited her experience, when she did all of her post work and her integration, just thinking about it, journaling it, she realized that she was able to retain that as though she had been told that as a child. And from
Jeez.
the end of her sessions, She's completed her graduate degree. She wants to go into counseling professions to help others. She has never had a recurrence of her eating disorder. She has never had another issue with overconsumption of alcohol. She is happily remarried to someone who is healthy and loves her. She can eat without being unable to stop. She is incredibly healthy. Her entire life is different. And it wasn't because she had a silver bullet, pharmaceutically backed medication bottle. It was because she had a substance that allowed her mind to do what it needed to do to heal her from the inside out. No more symptoms to mask because the problem is no longer creating symptoms.
Wow, I'll tell you what, that's really cool. I got like a lot of stuff here on just scientific research and like how this works and everything else, but I don't think anything is as cool as the stories. You know what I mean? And, with that being said, is there any other stories of people with similar, I don't know, experiences or that about, like, within your trials or your research that you could share? Maybe just another story that was really impactful, because that's a super cool story. I could really see how that could heal somebody for sure.
Is incredible. And so yeah, there's a bunch of stories, specifically from veteran studies, and different interactions I've had in the course of my research, particularly with combat veterans and first responders. Um, what I'll do in order to not identify anybody,
Right.
I'll combine two of them that are very similar, and this is
Okay.
a common thread, I think, for a lot of specifically adult males that have encountered significant and ongoing violence. And then they are asked to come back to their normal life and remember the milk at the store and be patient when their kids won't brush their teeth. And it's just asking someone to have two brains and two lives like that with a 20-minute drive in between is horrible. I think probably a lot of people have seen any of those really great military movies where you see someone come back from combat. In combat, they had a ton of like agency, purpose, brotherhood. It didn't actually matter what the mission was necessarily. It was that we were there and we were doing it together and we knew we'd save each other's life if we needed to. And then they
And really
come.
quick, I don't mean to
Uh-huh.
interrupt you, but just saying that before I lose track of it. I've seen a lot of war movies. I think one of the most impactful, probably the most impactful scene that I ever saw that really spoke to me and was probably the most realistic scene of any movie I've ever seen when it comes to just what it's like to come home in a weird way is the movie The Hurt Locker, where I forget who plays the part, but he's back home. It's the end of the movie. And, he had just done like his third tour, fourth tour, and he was really excited to get home and all that stuff. And the next scene, he's standing like in a Walmart. And, he's an EOD guy and, had some terrible experiences in Iraq. And then like the very next scene, he's like standing in a Walmart and he's looking down he's like right in the middle of the frozen aisle. And he's looking down one side and he's looking down the other. And he just felt so out of place compared to like it didn't feel real anymore to him. And then the next scene, he's deployed again, volunteered and split again because it felt more real to him being in Iraq, working with his boys than being in a Walmart in a frozen food section. I mean, that scene spoke volumes, I think, to a lot of guys.
And I think it was Jeremy Renner.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah.
Who had a hell of an
I that
experience himself
Yeah, yeah.
in real life.
And
Yeah.
I
Yep.
think that's actually that's a differentiation too between the cumulative and ongoing trauma that first responders and police officers, I would even say like child welfare workers, um,
For sure.
experience
Yeah.
because it's part of the day to day. But you don't have the same mission necessarily, at least not one that's as tangible. You don't have the same tribal affiliation because you're going to work. That's different than being deployed. And you also don't have the widespread understanding of a larger community connected to those efforts because most people are just doing their day-to-day life. It's very much like if you go to the grocery store the day after somebody you love dies, you're going to feel angry at everybody for going shopping and having a normal life because shouldn't they feel sad now too because I lost something? But the world doesn't align with your individual perception all the time. And
Yeah,
so
that's a great
when
example.
we right, so when we have these expectations of people to just revert back to a very normative adaptive state when they've built up survival mechanisms in a maladaptive way, is it's very much the actual quote of "pull yourself up by your bootstraps," which I love when people don't complete accurately what sayings are. That kind of quote, that colloquialism of "pull yourself up by your bootstraps," was meant as a joke because it was supposed to describe an impossibility because gravity doesn't let you just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It's impossible. So that entire quote's origination was meant to describe an impossible scenario you could never possibly hope to overcome. But that's what we do when we talk about people having socioeconomic mobility or recovering from chronic behavioral health disorders. It's a bootstrap question.
Right.
When I think
Yeah.
some of the stuff too with I'm gonna chime in real quick with like especially military, some of the first responder stuff is those are like type A masculine men. So the amount of shame they carry as well that like builds and stuff and like finding that root problem. And I think one thing where I mean just like the ego deaths you have from hallucinogenics, whether it's something that you feel you constructed yourself or it's something that was from the past from a family member or something else like you have these ego deaths and you start to let go of some of these things that you thought were so important to you because you realize like the root of why you're holding on to that. And typically, once you find that root, like it's not what you thought it was, you know? And,
Yeah.
and I think with men in general, like the shame and the not I feel like from women, a lot of the stuff comes from not being enough of what a woman should look like from society, and men comes from like the opposite side of I'm not doing good enough to support my family, or I'm, doing these behaviors that are hurting my family, and that just stacks shame, So that's always the roots of depression and those things, how they're treated between men and women has always been like a real interesting thing to me too, because I mean, men are killing themselves at an alarming rate where women tend to sit in it more, have things like bulimia, eating disorders, or men will drink themselves to death or just kill themselves, you know?
Yeah, yeah, and what you're talking about is those internalized versus externalized behaviors, and you can see a lot of correlation across genders with that. Like, women are far more likely, especially teenage girls, to internalize a lot of behaviors, and what that does is it creates that low confidence. It creates early pregnancy. It creates lifelong drug problems. It creates eating disorder, depression, obesity, metabolic disorder, heart disease. But with men, while internalized behaviors exist in both, as do externalized, men are more likely to externalize behaviors. So you see this as oppositional defiance, conflict orientation, getting into fights, feeling like you always have to push back on things. And so the gender differences are interesting, even though there's some shared components. But you're
For
right. It's
sure.
it's what did the root? What was the root, and what did it do to the tree? And it just looks a
Right.
little different.
Right.
You reminded
Excellent.
me of a story. I have one brief
I was
story
gonna
of
say
somebody, and it
we need to get back to the I interrupted the best parts. I know there's probably people out there like, damn it, Bricker. So
no, it's good. It's good because Joel actually jogged my memory because what you had said, Joel, was when you have that ego death, and just just to put into perspective ego death, it's not all of a sudden you feel worthless because you don't have any ego anymore. It's looking at that kind of um that psychoanalytical idea of ego, which is your sense of self, your identity, your selfish driver, not necessarily purely selfish, but it very much like a child develops with I'm the only person in the world and the world's created for me. Generally, we grow out of that a little bit, but when we have threats to our identity, so if we're looking at somebody coming back from combat. Your identity is very, very much rooted in who you had to be successful in the context you just came from. So if you are incredibly assertive, you are a leader in high stakes scenarios, and you know how to execute a task with immediacy and potentially violence, those are all adaptations that serve you so well in your combat role. Now you go back to the frozen food aisle in Walmart and some guy's being a dick to you, and all of a sudden, all of your responses of violence of action, immediacy, I have the skills and capability, this is an injustice, those are maladaptive now because you're in the frozen food aisle at Walmart and that guy's probably wearing, Crocs, and he has no idea what you're about to do. And so that's why you see these higher incidences of veterans having criminal interactions. Like you see a lot of dysfunctional and violent marriages. You see a lot of substance use. You see a lot of self harm and really high risk behaviors. And it's because your adaptation worked in this world, but in the other world, it's really, really, really harmful. And so that's that. What is the root problem? How do we solve that? And if it's neurobiological because it's trauma based, then we need to address the neurobiology of it, not the symptoms.
Yep.
Um, and it can be
Yep.
surprising. Sorry, I will get to my story.
No,
So
that was fantastic. That was fantastic. Yep.
well, okay, so this was from what you had said, Joel, when you said it may not be what you expected. So this was another participant in my study, and which is funny because it was a great even division between male and female, but the two stories coming to mind are female. Um, and she had been a traveling medical professional. She had just a very straightforward, blunt way about her. Didn't seem like somebody who would struggle with very much or admit to it. But she had realized over time that she was drinking really heavily and drinking alone and really preferring that traveling medical position because it allowed her to never have established relationships. And she was just spiraling. She was getting to a point where it actually was impacting her work, which was really shocking because she was highly, highly competent and really invested and motivated in her field. What she ended up doing was, a variety of traditional therapies. Went to AA, found some success and support, but really it was very short lived. She read about just some throwaway article on psychedelic assisted therapy, and she ended up contacting the clinic that I was conducting my study at, and this was a couple years. She had engaged in the therapy a couple years before I got there, but she got into contact with me and told me her story. And she said that she had a full understanding of what she was going to encounter because that was who she was and she understood everything. And she went into her first journey and she said that was the big one because she um, again, doors. It's a really common thing, geometric patterns and doors. She had gone into a room and she said that she had fully anticipated and rehearsed in her
Was this
mind
on
before the journey.
psilocybin? Was this
This
psilocybin or
one, yes, this is a psilocybin journey. And so she had fully rehearsed in her mind, I'm going to go talk to my mom because I know it's my mom. I know that we've had a hard time. I know that it's her. It's definitely my mom that's making me feel so horrible. I feel like I'm a horrible person. I don't have anything. Like I just want to die. And she went into the little room in her mind, and instead of it being her mom, it was her boyfriend she had when she was 20. And she's like a 42-year-old woman now, and she is surprised in her own mind, experiencing surprise at meeting her boyfriend, who was quite a few years older than her when she was 20, but an incredibly generous and kind, wonderful human being to her. And she wasn't comfortable with somebody being authentic and genuine and really loving her for who she was. And so she pushed him away and then she'd come back and she'd push him away and she'd come back. And then, right as things were really, really perfect, he got a terminal diagnosis. And instead of being by his side and saying, I'm going to be here with you, she left in the middle of the night and never called him and he died.
oh my god.
And Yeah.
Oh,
And
man.
so she'd been carrying that with her. And the only thing that he said is he just looked at her and he goes, "I'm okay. You can let it go." And that's it. And it's very similar to the other young woman who talked to herself as a child. She came out of that journey just explosive crying and super shocked and really, really had never realized because her brain had closed that off from her. That was too much. I can't admit that I did something so horrendous. And I can't admit that I just let the one person who cared about me die alone. And so it was shut off and it had all of these impacts throughout all of her life until she was able to look at it. And she could not do that until she had that ego dissolution, until she was on a balcony looking down at her life, looking at her problems, and not being impacted by them in the moment in order to process them with critical thought.
Wow. That's
It's
that's
intense.
intense on a couple different levels. That's man, that's rough. Yeah, I could see how she'd have a hard time with living with herself on that one, man, for sure, and they'd have to go back and mitigate it, you know? Before we get into the next question, which I'm pretty much gonna focus on, like, the different components of the psychedelics, like ibogaine, psilocybin, ketamine, like we talked about what MDMA was and stuff, and then, there's ayahuasca and DMT, and there's so many different options out there, and, most of them are not available in the United States at all, but, before that, is there one more story? Is there one more good one before we get into another? Because I think these stories really speak to people. I think they really do, because you can relate to them as just a natural person. And I love the fact that we've talked about 2 stories that didn't even have to do with veterans or first responders. They were people. They were just people. And, I say this to get people all the time. It's like, you can't compare your trauma to somebody else's trauma and then belittle your experiences because you don't think that you should be feeling a certain kind of way because other people have had it worse than you. And it's like, hey, man, the worst thing that happened to you is the worst thing that happened to you, you know? And it's like you're dealing with that. It's like you're not, where you don't have to compare yourself to guys that were in Vietnam or somebody who had, if you were a cop and you showed up and there was a suicide, that you had to deal with and cut somebody down who hung himself, which is just a terrible thing to have to do. And it's like, but there's people out there that, you know, I went to war a bunch of times, but I would rather do that 100 times in a row than be sexually assaulted. Do you know what I mean? And I say that because I'm like, yeah, I'm a veteran. I've been to war. I have stuff that I deal with, but it's like I'd take that 100 times over at least over being sexually assaulted, especially violently and horrendously, or by somebody you trusted. There was maybe a parent or something. I mean, I'd be like, yeah, I'd take my experiences over that for sure. And those people need help as much or more than I do, you know. And so I just think
Well,
it's really cool.
I think that's
I like the stories. I think people relate to them really well.
think that's the interesting about depression because it has a lot of different faces, you know? Like, there's some people who haven't had that trauma, and then they're sitting there feeling guilty because they're like, "Why am I so fucked up? Because I didn't," and some of it, they might've had, like, some of a rough childhood, but comparative to what their friends went through or stuff like that, and that's where I think, like, from my experience, like, psychedelics made me wanna be accountable because I realized I was walking a path that, like, wasn't my path necessarily. It was like I ended up being 35, divorced, went through a real fucking toxic relationship, and that's when I started leaning into psychedelics because I was like, "What the fuck is my problem? Like, who am I?" And, I think for people who haven't had the PTSD or, like, a traumatic experience, but say you're just drink a little bit more, you're fighting with your wife all the time, like, take a step back, a deep breath, and think about microdosing or talk to somebody who has done it, and they could put you on the right path, and if you really think you're fucked up, go see a psychiatrist and talk about wanting to do it because it makes you see things differently, whether it's politics, whether it's religion, and you don't lose those parts of yourself. They don't go away, but it makes you kind of let go of the importance of some things and like really concentrating on the things that are present and in front of you and the things you can control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's actually, so that reminds me, there's a Hebrew philosophical tradition that summarily it's called turning the gem. And it's like, you hold on to a gem and this is a story, but when you turn it, you see the story from a different perspective. It's the same story. And so as you mature and you develop and you have different life experiences, you start to turn the gem on things that have happened to you. And when you look at psychedelics on a neurobiological level, they're restoring neuronal health and cellular health. They are increasing those little dendritic spikes and their density, so that you can have better connection, more concrete connections. But all of those connections are literally different ways of thinking. And so psychedelics are very much letting you hold and turn the gem on your own without waiting for a different surface to inform your perspective. And it cannot be underscored enough. Like, we can't do that with traditional Western medicines. We just can't. So this was a young man who had joined the Marines. He had completed one tour. He'd come back, and in his mind, very much like we were just talking about, he was like, "I've done some, but I have seen and done less than so many other people. Why am I so messed up?" He came back with some injuries that had some chronic pain issues. So he was overprescribed opioids, as is incredibly common, especially just right at that apex of the opioid crisis. And he didn't have a lot of family support. He didn't have anybody really near him. He'd just come back from that deployment physically messed up, in a lot of pain, overprescribed prescriptions that were then yanked by the physician because there was new legislation and parameters around prescribing those. So he was pulled off of high doses immediately, cold turkey, and he was going into full horrific withdrawal. And if anybody's ever observed or experienced opioid withdrawal, it's terrible.
I
Less likely that you'll die, but it feels like you want to.
Well, and not only the physical symptoms, but the mental. I had a doctor who essentially got me prescribed a low dose Oxycontin. Like, I came off them because I got tired of feeling like I was fucked up and, like, almost killed myself. I was, like, 16, but, and that was right before, like, all that stuff started happening, probably 5, 6 years before, like, and that's actually what got me into psychology because I was like, "Why the fuck did I wanna kill myself?"
Yeah.
And then I figured out what happens when you do opiates for an extended period of time and turn off that switch.
Oh,
So go
yes.
Yeah.
ahead,
Yeah.
continue, sorry.
No, it's a great point. Like, you're messing with not only the pre-existing issues, whether they're physical or mental, but now you're also messing with your chemical issues in your brain because everything's out of whack. Um, and so that removal of the opioids for this individual, he was in excruciating pain all the time. So natural next step was black tar heroin at the time, because A, it stopped the horrific withdrawals, and B, it took away a lot of the pain he was experiencing, specifically physically. So now he has only been 6 months from being an invested high performer, member of a military tribe, and now he's an addict and he's living on the street. And it's been 6 months. And it was just so horrendous to hear how many different systems and processes and providers had failed this individual, because he was a young guy, very, very young. I think um, at the time of this study, I don't think he'd yet hit, I think he was like only turning 28, 29. So he was very young. Um,
Yeah.
and he really, really internalized that addict identity. He thought, I'm like everybody else in my family. I can't overcome this. I have less impact to me, compared to all the other people I served with, but I'm broken. And so again, last resort. And for him, he did ayahuasca. And so he had a friend that was able to take him down to South America. They experienced an ayahuasca journey. He talked a lot about how much vomiting there was. And and it's very cathartic in a lot of ways. Um, but what he was able to do when he came back, and I should also mention that he did this ayahuasca journey because he had been living kind of two lives, trying to be I'm a functional veteran. I have my own small business, um and it just was falling apart on the other side. And so he really, really, really wanted to make sure that he could stay married to this person that he loved. He wanted to have a family and he didn't want to live two lives. And he had been so irrational and so uncontrollable and so drug seeking that it was leaking into this life and he couldn't keep them separated anymore. And he knew he was going to lose her. And he knew he was going to lose his business endeavor. He knew he was going to lose absolutely everything. He'd been on the outs for about 3 weeks and had thought, this is my life now. I've lost everything before this opportunity presented. Um, he was down South America for 2 weeks, which included a lot of pre and then journey and then post kind of integration sessions. And I actually was able to confer with his wife. They're still married. They've been married for a few years now. And he gave me permission. He actually suggested it. Can you ask her a few questions? And I asked her questions like, what was he like before? What was he like after? And her response was, when he came back from South America, he didn't just come back, he came back to me. And she could see him and she knew that he was who he was, and he felt the same way. And again, same scenario, no recidivism. There's been no issues with opioids. He hasn't touched them since he went to South America, hasn't even had the inclination, doesn't even really drink, says he just doesn't like it, whereas before he used to drink just recreationally and now he just doesn't like it. um, and they I mean, for all intents and purposes, what they shared was this was life changing and it created a new life for both of them that would have been impossible without that journey.
That is that's great. That's fantastic. And that actually kind of leads me towards I wanted to talk about maybe what separates or differentiates or makes one special for one thing and not another between a lot of these different psychedelics. But even before that, bringing up ayahuasca. Ayahuasca is crazy to me because the people down in the Amazon, it's not like taking mushrooms, you know? There's a lot of speculation that like psilocybin and mushrooms in India, the reason that cows are so revered in India and it's illegal to kill them historically from a long, long time ago was because when you flipped over a cow patty, you had a psilocybin mushroom that would take you to the next world. And they're like, you
Yeah.
can't kill these creatures. They're magic. Like they give us magic. You can't kill them, you know? But it's like, that's kinda simple. You eat the mushroom, you have the experience, you know? But ayahuasca is not that. Ayahuasca, it's amazing to me how they discovered this because
Yeah, it's like a
apparently it's 2
cocktail, and you
different
need.
plants. Yeah.
Yep.
You need a what is it, DMTONI inhibitor? Is that I forget the acronym. I probably didn't say it right. But you need 2 plants. So one's the actual psychedelic itself. But if you just eat that plant, I guess your stomach prohibits the psychedelic from taking effect in your body. You need another plant combined with it to mitigate that plant in that acid you have in your stomach, that whatever that acronym is, and then then the ayahuasca plant does what it does. But I mean, if you think about the Amazon jungle and the amount of species and vegetation there is down there, I mean, there's gotta be tens of millions or hundreds of millions of different kinds of plants, at least, all over the place, and to think that these guys, these shamans, these however far back it goes, and I think ayahuasca probably goes back way further, just like all of we're finding out, like, a lot of these, like, the mystery schools in the Middle East and India and some of these other places, they included psychedelics. You had who was that emperor from Rome that went and had an experience? Really, he was in the movie freaking with he's portrayed in the show with Russell Crowe where he dies and his son kills him in his sleep.
Marcus
Um,
Aurelius?
Marcus Aurelius. He went and had some kind. There's documentation of Marcus Aurelius going, I think, into Greece or somewhere around there, and I forget
Well,
the
the
name.
illusion mysteries.
The illusion mysteries, exactly. Having some kind of like journey, and these illusion mission, mysteries are spoken about in a lot of different language and a lot of different cultures, a lot of different, I mean, in religions far older than the Abrahamic religions, which are Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And it's just like this goes back, peyote in the Americas with the Native American tribes. They use peyote and it has very similar effects. And anyway, the ayahuasca thing it's secondary, but it's just amazing to me how they're able to put those plants together. Two plants from hundreds of millions of species, and you have these experiences, but you have to have these very two specific plants, and you have to eat them or ingest them in a very specific way to have it, or else you're not going to have it. It's crazy how they came up
Well,
with
and
it.
it's
What do you got?
in all these cultures too. Like you have morning glory. Like there's all these plants that people use throughout these different cultures, and most of them are um like native or what's the word I'm looking for? Indigenous like cultures and stuff. But they all like in Utah they had some it's like a type of tobacco that makes you hallucinate. And they're starting I just saw some Mormons get all upset about it. Because people are starting to use it again. But I forget what it's called, but it's interesting how all these cultures,
Can't be think
and
hey,
I
we can't have you thinking for yourself in this society, homie, and definitely not with these
well,
religions. That was the
and I
thing about
think
we
too,
talked
some
about
of
that with psychedelics.
those were ceremonies, and it was like becoming of age, and like they did them at certain times. And one thing America lacks is culture because we're such a young country and we've tried to adapt all these different cultures to make what America is. But like we don't look to our elders. Our elders are capitalists and making money. Like we don't have that like where these other societies had culture and elders who you looked forward to and community in America because we're such a young country and we've essentially eroded all these cultures and tried to create our own. I feel like we're kind of lost in this, and it's not just America, it's worldwide, but I feel it's a little bit,
Yeah.
um,
The cultures we
like
have
that.
are very young. Like, if you think about, like, West Virginia has a very specific culture built around not ancient coal mines, but within the last few hundred years. You have, like, the automotive industry culture. You have the ranchers and farmer culture, you
But it's
know?
but
You
it's all
have
based on capitalism. It's not based
100
on
yeah, it is,
anything like
and it's very
pure,
recent.
like
It's not old, you know what I mean? It's within we can see it. We can see where it started. And so you're right, because that's what I mean, like, the stuff that we develop in the United States, it's very, very regionally specific, and it's also specific on industry and jobs and capital, just like what you said. And so, with that being said, with with the ibogaine, with ayahuasca, with ketamine, with psilocybin, peyote, with is there I know the ibogaine is supposed to be really helpful for addiction, and this thing that Trump just signed, it's actually kind of specifically names ibogaine. It seems like ibogaine is they didn't really talk about. I hear there's a lot better results with psilocybin and stuff, but ibogaine seems to be very, 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 very good for. I guess I'm talking about ketamine more with that because ibogaine has fantastic results. I've talked to some guys myself that were former addicts that did ibogaine, and they've never touched anything since then ever. But can you speak to kind of how these different psychedelics affect you differently and maybe good for one thing and not so much for another?
Yeah, yeah. So broadly, efficacy of psychedelics has to do with set and setting, right? So what is the intention behind it? And where are you doing this? What is the outcome? So it is very much what's the motivation and the modality. um those are two of the most significant factors for psychedelics having any kind of efficacy on any kind of disorder or hardship. When it comes to the different types, it's pretty individualistic, but there are some generalities. So uh I think it's important to point out, ibogaine and ayahuasca are deeply unpleasant. They are not. It is not a recreational. I'm just gonna dip into these right now. So, like a significant dose of ibogaine or ayahuasca is incredibly uncomfortable, cognitively, physically, in every way, digestively. Um, But that cathartic element to it is also there's an association with like a cognitive catharsis and an emotional catharsis as well, right? It's an emptying for a refill with things that are substantive, sustainable, and healthy. When you look at LSD, psilocybin, you're looking more at introspective pathways, right? So um, maybe cathartic in an emotional or psychological sense, but very much attuned to an exploratory journey and a seeking journey. When you look at ketamine, again, that's that dissociative. So that does allow you to access painful events and memories without the impact of the emotion of those. And that's helpful. It can be limiting because it's not going to allow those breakthroughs. Um, when you look at synthetic versus naturally occurring, there are some differences there. With synthetics, there tends to be there's more concern, I think, in and outside of the community of things like MDMA and overdose potential. Typically, a lot of overdoses that are documented with MDMA are related to polysubstance abuse. It's hard to differentiate between that versus something else. There are
Right.
some cardiac implications for ibogaine. Very, very rare. I always like to remind people that the likelihood of you getting really, really horrendously injured because of alcohol is substantially higher than if you were to do psychedelics every day for like 2 months straight. So
Right.
like the
Oh
the
yeah.
overdose potential is incredibly low, which is why they should be reclassified. You were touching on the recent executive order, and so it does mention psilocybin in it, but it's primarily more as it's a right to try, which means that people who are experiencing terminal diagnoses have a right to try that, even though it's not had FDA approval, which is phenomenal because when it comes to psilocybin specifically, terminal diagnoses, end of life care, um, Joel, you'd mentioned rites of passage. Often these hallucinogens are really, really effective for ushering in a life transition, managing really abject grief and loss. And it's not because it's making you just feel happy because it's a drug, it's giving you new tools to manage and process your grief and your limited understanding of what life and death is. So there was a huge swath of studies that were conducted on psilocybin specifically, and the target population for research was people. So this was conducted in the 90s, and so this was the AIDS HIV epidemic, right? And so you had a ton of people who were suddenly not only diagnosed with what was a terminal diagnosis, but one that carried incredible shame. I mean, like Princess Diana
Right.
made world news
Yeah.
because she reached down and initiated physical contact with someone who is HIV positive, and that's how absolutely toxic those people felt to society was they were untouchable.
It's like
And
lepers.
yes, yes, and the amount of grief for the life you're losing, shame in the way you're losing it, and the being ostracized from society and being judged created just enormous levels of major depression, extreme anger, separation from loved ones, all of the things you can imagine when someone is in deep, deep shame and depression. And there was a couple of different studies that were really, really wonderful because across the board, and you never say this in research, right? You very rarely get to say almost all participants or all participants. But for these people who had these terminal, like socially condemning diagnoses, the pre and post of their psychological state and their emotional health is so remarkable because all of these participants went into this study going, fine, I'll do it. I don't care. I'm going to die. I hate the world. The world hates me. What's the point? All of them came out going, I'm really appreciative for this life that I've had. And this isn't the end, it's just the next step. And it's probably not the world's
Wow.
fault that they feel weird about this. And they all had remarkably higher scores in general outlook, even though their diagnosis hadn't changed. They're still going to die. and they're still going to die from that same, ostensibly shameful disease. But it completely created a paradigm shift, not changing the circumstance, but the mindset. And that kind of gift to people who are facing the next journey when it's, end of life care, palliative care, if you're in hospice, you're watching someone, you know, really truly fear dying and you can't do anything for them. And to see that remarkable change of acceptance, reaching out to family members that they've been estranged from, finding that reconnection, it ushered in their next phase of existence, even if it's not in this world, in a peaceful manner that you just can't replicate.
Yeah. The end of life stuff is fascinating to me. I've read a lot of that research where you had cancer patients, like when you talk about same thing with like an HIV diagnosis in the 80s, you're dead. It's over. Game over, bro. Like you're not coming back from it. Not so much for today, but today you still have all the cancers and like everything else that people have. And I've read some really awesome testimony of individuals who have, had terminal cancer. And it's like that is I mean, getting a diagnosis like that if you got kids, wife, your day to day, and then all of a sudden it's gonna be lights out. You know it's coming. I mean, we all know it's coming anyway, but it's different if you know it's coming in a very distinct amount of time. And like these people that went and did end of life psychedelic therapy and exactly what you said, like all their testimonies almost to a T, like almost 100% were basically like, "This isn't it. I'm fine. Like, there's something else waiting for me on the other side. I'm totally good with checking out. I wanna make sure everybody knows how much I love them and that I'm gonna be okay because this isn't the end." It's really cool hearing them talk like that. Yeah, Joel.
And I think the cool thing, because there's a kind of resurgence with some of these practices that didn't necessarily come from all cultures, like doulas, like life or birth doulas and death doulas. Like these people who came from a spiritual perspective, not a scientifical perspective, to usher in new life or usher out somebody on their way out. And culturally, some of these things are slowly working their way back into our society, where it's not, like you have a hospital midwife and then you have like a midwife who's more spiritual, and like the meshing of those two things are slowly happening, where it's still very medical, but there is some people thinking outside the box of more how we used to do these things versus how we turned everything into get your baby, get them out quick, get out of the hospital quick, where this used to be this long process and it was a spiritual thing.
Yeah. Yeah, you're totally right. That's it, it's a fear-based interventionist mindset. So whenever we're afraid, we feel as though we need control. And so if we can intervene, even if it's not actually necessary, we feel like we're controlling it. So there's a reason that the majority of American babies are born on weekdays during work hours. That is not how
Right.
babies arrive. They arrive when they want. But you have hospital staff, physicians, and parents that are beholden to a commodified citizenry where they have to be productive. And so taking the time to allow your child to come out when they are ready in the mode that they are ready in just feels like it's not an option. It's better to just schedule it because we have soccer in 2 days after that. So, like, let's just get it done. And you lose the procedural meaning. You lose all of that. And that's one of my apprehensions about this executive order is it opens the door, but we still have a fear-based interventionalist mindset. We are not going to solve horrific trauma that people carry home from war unless we stop sending them to war. And
Yeah.
also, we need to be able to give them sustainable tools. And sustainable means that you know the process, not just the outcome. And we are so accustomed to take a pill, inject yourself, these interventions that we think are going to address the problem, but they're really just mitigating the symptoms. And then we're still ill.
And
So, mhm.
and what scares me with that executive order also is like turning something that is highly spiritual into
Yes.
something that is like mainstream capital medicine. And that's like
Yeah.
horrifying for me because like
And what
there's one
yeah,
thing I like
I
capitalism in
agree.
some ways, but the medical should never be for profit. And when you read those orders, he talks a lot about the drugs that are patent and already have names, not about ayahuasca. He mentioned psilocybin, but it was more leaning into things that were you could get subscribed versus just go and
Yes.
take. And that scares
Yeah,
me.
it's true. And
Oh,
for
go
our
ahead.
societies, it's baby steps. You're right about the everything is built around capital. You know what I mean? The whole system is built around capital one way or another. It's like maternity leave. Why is that a fight? Like if you have a mom that has a baby on that scheduled time on a, Monday through Friday during work hours, why aren't we like why we can ask for $1 billion to fight a war nobody fucking agrees with or wants to fight at all, but we can't give maternity leave, like 6 months of quality good maternity leave to moms or dads, both even, that,
Oh,
so they
yeah.
can get their kids squared away and fucking and develop a family without having to worry about, I mean, Jesus Christ, paying for childcare.
Oh, I was just gonna say so the problem is the mindset, right? Like societally, it's a mindset like we are commodified citizens, right? If you're not taxable, you're not valuable. And that's a really, really hard thing because families are a process. And so when we are overworked and we are underpaid and we are having to put our children into strangers' care or leave them inadequately supervised, we're not meaningfully raising them. They're largely raised on screens that are being fed different information that is primarily to make them into industrious taxable workers that purchase goods. And so when we
Raised by the
lose,
public school system, is what they're
yes,
raised
yes.
by.
And but what's really ironic is if you interrupt these chronic cycles of disease, dishealth, and behavioral health disorder, you save billions. Out of all of the Medicaid, Medicare individuals that need that for their health insurance, 90% of all of those costs are consumed by 10% of the people on Medicaid, Medicare. And that is because they have comorbid disorders and chronic lifelong treatment resistant disease. If we are having to pay either through the Veterans Administration, Medicaid, Medicare, if we are paying for people to have these interventionist services, shouldn't we be intervening with something that stops their need for the service rather than just making it harder to access or really again just for profit? So if something is a natural human right, which I think there's some variety in what people perceive as a human right, but to me, that is you have access to clean drinking water. You have access to safety as you sleep at night with your family, and you know that there's not going to be an attacker coming in your door. It also means that you have a right to health care because you need to be alive, and people that you love need to be alive.
It's
And it
funny how
means that you
being
need to have
alive
a
is,
right.
like, pretty important for the American dream.
What a luxury. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Right.
But and it's also education, right? So when you have these things, when you have physical safety, societal safety, you have psychological safety, then that's like as an individual, that is when you are healthy. But when you are constantly having to pay for what is a human right, then wellness is behind a paywall. And so when we really, really want to look at how do we have cost savings as a country when we are one of the most obese, unhealthy, depressed, psychotic. I mean, we are lost. We are lost as a society, but we are not lost as people. And we have the ability. Exactly. But Joel, you actually both of you had talked about culture. There's a reason that these psychedelic substances have been used as initiations, as rites of passage, as religious experiences, as political um, mediation settings, as all of these different things. And it's because it allows you to get outside of your commodified state where you have a role to society, and it allows you to be open enough to see that we have an existence that is far deeper and more meaningful than going to work and paying taxes. That's very threatening to establishments, right?
Oh,
So
yeah.
it,
Which is
it's
why
it's no
psychedelics was
surprise.
outlawed to begin with
Yes,
also.
yes.
Mhm.
So I wanted to speak about one more thing, and that has to do with the gold standard of research studies, because it drives me nuts when it comes to psychedelic research. When we see this executive order allowing for expedited review in clinical trials, we are still mislabeling this treatment as a pharmaceutical. It is not. When you have a gold standard for these clinical trials, it's usually like a double blind, right? So the researcher and the participant do not know if they have received the medication or the substance that we're trying to measure, right? So somebody might have a placebo, somebody might have the intervention, and nobody knows. It's double blind. That's supposed to be the gold standard. But if you look at the rejected MDMA trials from just a few years back that didn't go great, everyone seems to forget that one of the primary purposes, when you'd asked me about the difference between the efficacy or the experience between each of these substances, and I said the primary driving forces are set and setting,
Mhm.
that is the case in these clinical trials. You need someone to have a relationship developed in trust. You need to have a predictable setting. You need to have intentions and pre engagement therapeutic sessions, and you need to have
Mhm.
those parameters for feeling safe in the environment. Now you have just decided to use the same substance that requires all of those things, and you are tricking someone into taking it.
Right.
There's no trust with the facilitator. There's not really a facilitator. There's no intention set. You don't even know if you're going to go on a journey or not.
Yep.
How in the world could that ever be a display of how effective this medicine is when it's basically like taking a bottle of painkillers and throwing them at someone's face and saying, I don't think these painkillers work.
Right.
Like, you didn't take it the right way.
Right? That's a yeah, that's really interesting. I feel like mindset and setting, and I've talked about this to some of the guys that asked me about it, some of the boys, and it's always we always say the same thing. It's like you can't be sitting around a campfire with a bunch of other dudes drinking beers, and then taking mushrooms. Like,
Well,
it's
you
very
can. It's going to
specific.
be a different experience, though.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly, exactly.
Yes.
It's not gonna be what its true mission statement is, so to speak. You know what I mean? Of what that substance is put on earth to do for you. You can have one of those other kinds of experiences if you want, and that's great, and it probably is gonna put you in a great mood, but it's not gonna do that journey that you're gonna need. You know what I mean? It is you really gotta have that mindset right, and be around the right people that you
Well,
trust and stuff, and so what yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Joel.
and I think the therapy, sets you up with the tools to like work through that. So if you're actually somebody who has like you're diagnosable with some sort of mental illness or something like that, like it without therapy, because from my understanding, it like rewires your brain. But if you don't do anything after that, you still have the same capability to fall back. Like you need to make new ruts. So
Yeah.
you do or you do psilocybin, you have a flat road again, but you need to make new ruts on the path you want to go, or those old ruts will just show up. And that's why it's important to have it. Like if you're really trying to make a change, it's important to have it coupled with therapy, journaling, meditation, stuff.
Yeah,
Yes,
and
yeah,
a lot
and
of those
that's
reports talked
integration.
about
Yeah.
3 sessions too, like 3 sessions,
Right.
and they would talk about, like, 1 session, up to 3 by the 3rd session, it seemed like their symptoms were just, when they would report back a year later or whatever it was, after 3 full sessions, it seemed like the results were almost 100% vaporized, you know what I mean? Like, had changed their lives entirely, and so you've spoken at a few different things, or you've had a few different conversations with various audiences, but because of your investigations and stuff. And I'm just kind of curious, because you spoke here really recently to a sheriff's department and a police department, which is a really interesting thing to talk to them about, which is psychedelics, because as we know, cops, even in states where marijuana is legal, even in Colorado where psilocybin has been decriminalized, right, for personal use, which is awesome. Um, if you're a first responder, you still cannot use either of those substances, marijuana or psychedelics, without getting canned. And so, you talk to some cops. I'm kind of curious how their response was, and since then you talked to, I think, what, the assistant governor of Alaska, and then you were also at the psychedelic conference, and you had some experiences with the NFL and like some other kind of the cool experiences there. And so I'm just kind of, we could wrap this up with maybe just kind of seeing how those are three completely different entities. You're talking about the federal government. You're talking about
Yeah.
local law enforcement that cannot use, and also local law enforcement that put people in cages for using these things and have been for the last almost 50 years. And so, and then obviously now and then a giant corporation as well, and how they're handling it with their people. And it just seems like three kind of distinct population bases and interesting outcomes for that.
Well, and I always look like a weirdo because I get very, very excited because when you find the cornerstone of something, um, it gives you the base in which to build something better. And the cornerstone of all of those different industries and organizations and individuals is that we are all trying to find a way to be well. And we are all struggling with not just societal pressures and hardships, but we're all struggling with trauma. Very, very, very conservative estimates put 1 in 4 people in the category of having significant adverse childhood experiences in the United States. 1 in 4. That's 25% is a large number. And when you look at the cycles of trauma, if you get one person that has
I mean,
significant
that's how
trauma
many million,
impacting
the
your
United
life.
States is what, 350 million people. So if you thought 25% of, I think it's 350 million people in the United States. I mean, that is a huge freaking number of people.
Yes. And that is metrics we have. That doesn't include the impoverished communities across the United States that are struggling with cumulative trauma and complex trauma because of poverty, violence, and lack of access to resources. Like, it's an exponential problem. And so I think what we're seeing now, why people in the NFL are paying attention, people in large scale like other corporations are paying attention, law enforcement, firefighters, veterans, like, we're all paying attention now because we all have it in our homes. We are
Yeah.
all married to, have a child that is, or experiencing ourselves someone who is struggling with an internal hurt that no matter how much love is applied or given, doesn't go away. And we all want to find a way to be well and connected. And so, as awful and tragic as it sounds, the really wonderful thing is that now we know it's trauma. So, now how do we fix it? And if we can have that kind of unity across all of these different sectors that have different motivations and different desires for what they want to be as an institution or as an individual, whatever, if we can line up like our value of we all deserve to be well. So how do we get there? And I think that that's the common thread, and I think that's what we're gonna see moving forward, is we're gonna have to fine tune, and we're gonna have to put some guardrails on this massive industrialized approach to doing, like, mass wellness, and we need to really insist that this healing comes from the individual, and the only thing that this medicine does is it opens the door, but you have to walk through.
Right. And I think another thing that's really important to be said is this has to be for you. You
Yes.
know, you do have some people that, I want to save my marriage. I want to save, my job. I want to, whatever it is. But it's outside of what the target is. The target's you individually. If you want to save your marriage, you need to save you. That's what you need to do. You know what I mean? If you want to save your career because you're fucking up so bad, you need to save you. Like, your
Mhm.
career will be saved if you save you. Your family will be saved if you save you. You're seeing there's a lot of examples, even from some of the stories you told, examples of people I know, that were deeply involved in even saving my life when I had some really hard experiences, years and years ago, that had come through because they made that decision to save themselves. And after they were able to save themselves, they were able to save other people and their own families. But that focus had to be internal. You have to be selfish with it. You really do.
And you break that cycle, hurt people hurt people, and it's just a massive cycle, and until you
Yep.
break that cycle and like you really want to change yourself and take accountability for your half, and some people are hands that they are dealt, and other people it's just talking about taking accountability and I think whether it's depression or you just want to be a better human, psychedelics are uh, a good step towards that.
Yeah, for sure. Is there anything else that I didn't ask or you want to talk about or say before we close this sucker down?
Nope, just thank you. And I do like the hurt people statement. And I also really like the loved people love people.
Yes,
I
for
think
sure.
I
That's
think
right.
if we address both of those things, then the world will be a better place. I just appreciate the invitation. Thanks for having me on to chat.
Absolutely.
Thanks for coming.
Absolutely. Yeah. Appreciate you. Love you both. We'll talk soon.
Love it, brother.